Hello and welcome to this session on the road to DELLHE, developing leadership literacies for pedagogically and ethically sound digital education. I'm very pleased to introduce the presenters for this session, Deborah Arnold, Albert Sangrà, and Sharon Flynn. I'm going to hand over now to the presenters and take it away, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Okay, welcome everybody to the session at the road to, I pronounce it Delhi, like the town in the city in India, developing leadership literacies for pedagogically and ethically sound digital education. You'll see the word ethics in here. And so what we're going to do in this session, after a few quick introductions, if you want to put in the chat where you're joining from, say a few words, then feel free to introduce yourself. We'll introduce ourselves in a moment. We're going to be comparing looking at some of the results of my recent doctoral research in this field of digital education leadership literacies, giving you the opportunity as participants to share your own experiences in terms of ethical and sustainable uses of education technology. Bringing this back into a comparison with the results of 3 case studies that I conducted as part of my research. And naturally, we're going to be, with the help of Sharon, looking at some of the synergies between this work and the fantastic work on the ALT ethical framework, which was launched this morning. And I hope many of you were able to attend that session. And we're going to close up with some recommendations as well for leadership development in this field. So I'm Deborah Arnold. If we look at the next slide, then we can see our Twitter handles as well. So I work as a project manager at UNEJ, which is the French Digital University for Economics and Management. And as I said, I've also just finished my PhD, submitted it at least at Universitat Oberta de Catalunya. And delighted to have with me today Sharon and Sharon Flynn and Albert Sangrà. Sharon, if you'd like to say a few words about yourself.
Thanks, Deborah. So my name is Sharon Flynn. I work with the Irish Universities Association on a project across 7 of the Irish universities called Enhancing Digital Teaching and Learning. I'm also a trustee at ALT and have been part of the team developing the new ethical framework, which was launched just this morning. So really delighted to be here.
And Albert?
Yes, my name is Albert Sangrà, and I'm full professor at the Open University of Catalonia, a fully online university. I'm also the director of the UNESCO Chair in Education and Technology for Social Change at that university. And I'm very happy to be here to share with Deborah and Sharon this work, and particularly with Deborah, that it's a good result of her thesis.
Thank you, Albert, and thank you, Sharon. Yes, in case you're wondering, Albert is my PhD supervisor and now my publishing buddy. We have lots and lots of future projects to work on, but let's focus on this work from on the DELLHE framework. So as I said, digital education leadership literacies for higher education. So we're talking about literacies here, not leadership styles, not leadership competences. This is really grounded in the work of Heather Davis that you might be familiar with around leadership literacies, and also the work on multi-literacies of the New London group, where we have literacies as representation, which is meaning making for the self. So this is where we're talking about mindsets and attitudes, and literacies as communication, meaning making for others, so behaviors and concrete actions. So linking this to the question of leadership. And one of the main outcomes of my doctoral research was this DELLHE framework, presented as a flower of 5 interrelated dimensions. So we don't have time today to go through all of them. The most relevant for this session is the sustaining dimension, which covers the human, environmental and financial impact of technology choices. So within this, we have ethical issues, we have sustainability questions, related to the impact of technology on the natural environment. And I know there was some discussion in the ALT ethical framework launch this morning about the link between that and wider sustainability concerns. So what I'd like you to do is to put in the comments in the chat any challenges that you yourself have encountered with respect to just two of these main issues, ethical or non-ethical uses of learning technology, or some of the things that we should be thinking about when we're considering the impact of technology and learning technology in particular on the natural environment. So I'm going to give you a bit of time to do that, and we will comment on your contributions as they come in. Maybe the images here will serve as a little bit of a prompt. I know that many of you might have been faced with ethical issues concerning online proctoring. Does anybody have any particular policies which integrate the weighing up the cost and benefits of learning technology in environmental terms? So should I repeat the question? Any examples of challenges that you've encountered or issues you think that we should be addressing in ethical terms? Okay, so makeshift online proctoring, yes. And I think that the ALT ethical framework has a lot to contribute there in getting people to think about these issues. Be interested to know if there are any examples of people actually concretely making decisions on learning technology to use in terms of the natural environment. How to quantify it. Systems and data storage, resource intensive, but how to measure it. Mass recording without consent. Zoom and testing software. This is for the proctoring. Okay, Albert, if you'd like to comment on any of these examples coming in, then do feel free.
Well, initially, what I think is that, for instance, from what Emma and Matthew and also sorry, Helen has said, or Sandra has said, is that I see that probably most of these issues are coming from something that could be approached in a different way. That is that we have replicated what we do face to face in an online environment. So my question would be, is that the way in order to have a sustainable environment using learning technologies to do the same we did before when we were face to face? So it's a kind of approach on leadership in which we can take into consideration that maybe when we move to a different context, environmental context, we probably should do things in a different way. Should we change our mind and think out of the box in order to carry out other kind of solutions using learning technologies?
Okay, exactly. And I'm seeing interesting points here about what happens when we're using business tools for teaching, that the ethical issues are not fully taken into account. And also what Sandra Partington's saying, interestingly, people seem to think online is green by nature. And for people who are researching that area, it's actually a much more complex calculation to make, and I don't know whether there are actually tools which will enable us to make that calculation, to weigh up the costs and benefits. At European level, there's work on the DigComp framework, which is now looking at green and digital. So there's a lot of work being done on that. That will be launched later on this year or early next year. If we now look at the framework itself, thank you for all those contributions. I'm going to hope to get a copy of this and then do a bit more precise mapping. But I'd like you to now look at the comments that have come in and look at the framework and see how robust this framework is in terms of where these issues fit. In the representation side, remember that we've got attitudes and mindsets here. So we're looking at digital education leaders, how they view these issues. We've got the positive and negative impacts of technology in terms of environmental concerns. Under human concerns, we've got ethics, social responsibility, and well-being. Financial concerns, obviously, this is like the triple bottom line of sustainability. And then there's another issue, which is all about being aware of changes in the external environment. Now, back in 2005, Gilly Salmon talked about the need to tap into weak signals. Now, I wonder how many people would have seen weak signals around global pandemics, for example, before it actually happened. And then in the communication side, so what are leaders, what are institutions actually doing to address these? We have embedding these environmental concerns in vision and policy, policies around access, equity and inclusion, safe, legal and ethical use of educational technology, and going as far as digital citizenship, promoting digital citizenship. And then financial concerns, especially for many large universities, the need to support scalable and sustainable initiatives. And again, this question of organizational agility comes into the picture when we're looking at the ability of an institution to react to those changes in the external environment. So delving deeper into this, we can now have a look at some of the case study results that from the case studies that I conducted. So 2018, 2019, pre-pandemic, but the results are still very, very relevant. So I looked at a large university in France, KU Leuven in Belgium, and the University of Northampton in the United Kingdom. Semi-structured interviews with a range of leaders at different levels within the universities, and also analysing strategy documents which were relevant to digital education. And what came out of this was, apart from very, very detailed case study reports, was this notion of DELLHE maturity. So leadership, digital education, leadership literacy maturity, which was a qualitative interpretation based on the case studies and the analysis of tensions and counterexamples and strengths and areas for attention. So we can have a look at what came out here. Now, obviously, we have to take into account the national context, the organizational culture, the historical development of higher education in each of these countries. But it was very, very clear that the French case study in particular had a very, very high awareness of the environmental issues, was beginning to consider getting these into policy. The human aspects, again, there was awareness of ethics, but some of the wider human concerns, and especially well-being, were much less clearly addressed. And it's no secret to say that the French higher education system is not very agile. In Belgium, the human dimension was very, very highly developed. The environmental issues as well, sustainability was clearly linked to digital education in policy and becoming part of practice. And organizational agility, although it was a large multi-campus university like the one in France, they'd rethought their way of working around a conceptual framework of a learning lab for more self-directed, distributed leadership without upending everything with with restructuring and so on. And that was very, very promising and still is. And then the UK example, again, the human dimension, very, very well developed. surprisingly less awareness of the environmental issues. And organizational agility here was quite developed, especially on the EdTech side, but much less so in terms of the faculties themselves. So this is really just a very, very quick overview of what I gleaned from those case studies with reference to the sustaining dimension. Now let's have another look at the ALT ethical framework, which was presented earlier. So I'm going to hand over to Sharon to say a few words about this.
Thanks very much, Deborah. I have to say I was really interested when Deborah reached out and asked me to become involved in today's presentation. And at the time when we first started talking, the framework hadn't come together, and it has really only come together in the last few weeks. So there's been huge input. If you were listening to the launch event earlier, there's been huge input from the community, from the working group, and also a massive amount of work done, not by me, I have to say, in pulling together all of the suggestions, the feedback, the links to other documentation and frameworks that has come through from the community, to try and fit it all on one slide is quite incredible, and one image. So just very quickly, the framework is divided into 4 different areas, and it all addresses the ethical use, the ethical procurement, the ethical development, I suppose, of learning technology in education. So the 4 areas are awareness, professionalism, care and community, and values. And one of the things that I was talking about earlier was the fact that this is just the first stage of a journey. It's a conversation starter. It's a place to begin talking about really and reflecting on some of the developments that have happened over the last 18 months. And I can see in the chat there's been a lot of discussion about some of that, and a lot of it has been accelerated. So I think it's really good timing. But one of the things that we do intend to do is to map this framework onto other frameworks and policies and documentation that already exists out there. And obviously, I was very attracted with Deborah's invitation to look at how it might map to her DELLHE framework. And one thing I commented, and Deborah will know this, is just last week when we were looking at this, is actually the overlap that already exists there. You can see some of the same language, some of the same terms, some of the same ideas are coming through, even in just the sustaining piece that Deborah has shown you already. And I thought initially, and I think this is quite interesting, I thought initially it must be because Deborah was part of the working group, but she clarified that actually she wasn't, which I think is just, it just demonstrates the synergies that exist. So I'm very much looking forward to developing this a little bit further and doing a proper and full mapping. But I do think anybody who has looked at the ALT framework in any detail so far will already see that there are some synergies that exist and some very clear mappings there. And I'm very conscious that I don't want to go over time. So what we might do, Deborah, if it's all right, is move on to the poll.
Absolutely. And I think that's the natural transition as well, because the poll is designed to identify what the priorities should be for higher education institutions and leadership in particular. So here we've got the Vivox poll. People can go and check the link, which is going to be posted in the chat for you as well, or use the QR code, which is on the screen. We just have a few questions, and we'd like you to tell us what you think higher education leadership needs to be focusing on most. There could be others. We've selected 5 here, some from the ALT ethical framework and some from the DELLHE framework, because this helps us as well to see the synergies.
So you can join in the app itself if you already have it, or you can just go to vivox.app in a web browser and type in the code, and you should see the questions on your screen. So I can see 13 people have joined and we have 6 responses. That's 14 people. We'll give you a chance to respond. And I'd like to give a quick shout out to Vivox actually for helping me get this set up.
Somebody wants the code in the chat again. It was a little bit further up the chat, 159006207. Very hard to choose just one of them, yes.
Thank you, everybody, reposting the code. That's great. So we have 27 people have joined, 22 responses.
Shall we go with the ones that we've got?
Yeah.
Okay. Albert, what do you think? I'll give you time to digest them a little bit.
Well, yes, thank you, Deborah. I'm happy to see that the third one is maybe the one that people consider could be the most important one. But I agree with Dom that said it's very hard to choose one of them, because all of them, this was the tricky thing. So it was not easy to choose one and to put the other ones aside. But I think that probably 3 developing policies for safe, legal, and ethical use of educational technology, in some extent, could take into consideration all the other 2, in the sense that developing this kind of policies should be also at the same time concerned by these environmental approaches, concerns, and also to take into consideration the fair and equitable treatment for the access to learning. The most important thing here is to say that probably the decision is not to say we are not going to use technology because it could be not sustainable at some extent, but to look for a balanced solution that can give us the opportunity to take advantage of the benefits of the use of learning technologies and to avoid any kind of unsustainability of any system.
Okay, thanks, Albert. Yes, I'm very surprised and intrigued to see that organizational agility was the one which was got the lowest number of votes. I'm going to be looking back at the research that I did because my own instinct is that is actually one of the priority areas as well. But obviously it was very, very hard to choose. And so I know that we have about 30 seconds left in this session. So we're going to take into account those answers, the experiences that you've kindly shared in the chat. And I think taking this work forward now with Sharon and Albert on making those links and turning those synergies into recommendations for leadership and for leadership development as well. So thank you, everybody, for contributing, participating, and let's hope that we continue the conversation throughout the conference and beyond. Thank you very much. And thank you to my co-facilitators, Sharon and Albert.
Thank you.
Thank you.